Welcome to the Mr. Tomb Stories channel.
Help me. Help me. Before we dim the lights and descend into the shadows of a story etched into the very soul of American horror, a story of a family, a farmhouse, and a darkness that clung to them like a shroud. I want you to feel the floor beneath you, solid and real. For the Perron family, that feeling was stolen. You are about to hear of the true events that unfolded in Harrisville, Rhode Island, of the malevolent spirit of Bathsheba Sherman, who terrorized them, and of the night Carolyn Perron's body became a vessel for something unholy. But what if the true horror wasn't what was in the house, but what followed them out? If you crave the truth that lingers in the dark, feed the algorithm that brought you here by striking the like button and subscribe so you never miss the darkness when it returns. Now, let the story begin. The year was 1970, December. A chill had settled deep into the bones of New England. For Roger and Carolyn Perron and their 5 young daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, it was the dawn of a dream. They had poured everything they had into a sprawling 200-acre farm in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The house, known locally as the Arnold Estate, was a colonial-era relic, weathered and worn, but to them it was a kingdom. 14 rooms to fill with laughter, life, and the boundless energy of 5 girls. It stood on a gentle rise, a monument of potential, promising a quiet, pastoral life, far from the cramped confines of their previous home. As they moved in, the previous owner, a terse old man, offered them a piece of parting advice that seemed more peculiar than practical. He looked Roger in the eye, his gaze distant, and said, "For the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night." The Perrons, caught in the whirlwind of their new beginning, dismissed it as the charming eccentricity of a country elder. They would soon learn it was a desperate, insufficient warning. The first few days were a blur of unpacking and discovery. The girls raced through the labyrinthine corridors, their footsteps echoing in rooms that had been silent for years. But almost immediately, little oddities began to surface, like weeds poking through the floorboards of their idyllic new life. Carolyn would leave her broom leaning against a wall in the kitchen, only to find it later in the center of the room, standing upright, a small, neat pile of dirt beside it, as if it had been used by an unseen hand. Sometimes it would vanish altogether, only to be discovered days later in a part of the house they rarely used. The children were the first to encounter the house's other inhabitants, but these initial spirits were not frightening. They were gentle. Several of the girls spoke of a kind, smiling woman who would tuck them in at night, or touch a phantom comfort, smelling faintly of flowers. They saw a little boy, seemingly lost, who would push a small toy car along the floorboards, his ghostly form more melancholy than menacing. These were the good spirits, the ones who seemed to be residual echoes of a happier time, trapped in a loop of domestic tranquility. This gentle introduction was a cruel deception, a lullaby before the nightmare. It convinced the Perrons that while their house was certainly haunted, it was perhaps benevolently so. They were wrong, terribly wrong. The true darkness in the house began to stir, as if awakened by the vibrant life force of the 5 young girls. It was a gradual shift. The air would grow heavy in certain rooms, the temperature plummeting to a cold that felt unnatural, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the Rhode Island winter. A foul, cloying odor would manifest without a source and vanish just as quickly. The epicenter of this burgeoning malevolence seemed to be the cellar, a damp, stone-lined pit beneath the house. It felt ancient and wrong. Roger refused to go down there, an instinctive aversion he couldn't explain. A single bare bulb did little to push back the oppressive blackness, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and something else, something foul and predatory. The entity that would become their tormentor began to make its presence known. It was a female presence, but one stripped of all warmth, all compassion. It was a being of pure, unadulterated hatred, and it focused its rage on Carolyn. Lorraine Warren would later identify this entity as the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman. History painted a grim portrait of Bathsheba. Born in 1812, she had lived on that very property. Local lore, passed down through generations in hushed tones, accused her of being a Satanist. The stories claim that she had sacrificed her own infant child to the devil with a large sewing needle, and before hanging herself from the gnarled branches of a great tree on the property in 1863, she had cursed all who would ever dare to live on her land. Her final chilling declaration before her neck snapped was a vow of love to Satan, sealing her pact with the darkness. Whether the tales were entirely true or not, the spirit that haunted the Arnold Estate was undeniably real, and it wore Bathsheba's rage like a shroud. The mornings became a ritual of terror. At precisely 5:15 a.m. every single day, the haunting would escalate. The front door would unlatch and slam open with a deafening crack. The girls would be awakened by the feeling of their beds being lifted several inches off the floor before being dropped with a jarring thud. Christine was the first to see it clearly. She would speak of a figure in the corner of her room with a gray, distorted face, her head hanging at an unnatural angle, as if her neck was broken. The figure would just stand there, radiating a palpable aura of malice, and whisper a single terrifying word into the silence. Hem. The physical attacks began. The girls would be slapped, pinched, and have their hair pulled by an invisible assailant. Cindy, in particular, was tormented. She complained of a constant sibilant whispering coming from within the walls of her bedroom, a voice that knew her name, a voice that promised her unspeakable things. Carolyn's torment was the most severe. Bathsheba saw her as a rival, the matriarch of a family living on her land, a mother to children she could never have had. The attacks were personal, intimate, and deeply cruel. One afternoon, as Carolyn was resting on the sofa, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her calf. She looked down to see a perfect circle of concentric puncture wounds bleeding freely, as if she had been impaled by the very sewing needle from Bathsheba's legend. The wound was deep, and it was just the beginning. The entity wanted more than just to hurt Carolyn. It wanted to possess her. By 1973, the Perron family was living in a state of perpetual siege. The laughter that had once filled the 14 rooms had been replaced by a tense, fearful silence. They were prisoners in their own home, tormented by a force they could not see, fight, or understand. Desperate, On the verge of complete collapse, they reached out for help. Their search led them to a name spoken with both reverence and skepticism in circles that dealt with the paranormal. When the Warrens arrived at the Harrisville house farm, they brought with them an air of grim authority. Ed, the stoic, church-sanctioned demonologist, and Lorraine, the gifted but burdened clairvoyant. As Lorraine stepped out of the car, a visible shudder went through her. She didn't need to enter the house to feel the darkness coiling within it. She turned to Caroline, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. "I sense a malignant presence here," she said, her voice low, "and it's attached itself to you, Caroline. It wants to take you." The Warren investigation confirmed what the Perrons already knew in their hearts. Their home was infested. Lorraine conducted a walkthrough, her hand trembling as she touched the walls. In the girl's bedroom, she saw the spectral form of the woman with the broken neck. She described her perfectly, matching Christine's terrified accounts. As she stood near the ancient tree where Bathsheba had allegedly met her end, Lorraine was thrown into a violent psychic vision. She saw the hanging, felt the rage, heard the curse spat from dying lips. "This is an inhuman spirit," Ed explained to a terrified Roger and Caroline. "It was never human in the way we understand it. It is something diabolical that has taken on the identity of this woman, Bathsheba. It is feeding on your fear, and its ultimate goal is possession." The Warrens believed the only solution was a formal rite of exorcism, a dangerous and controversial ritual that required the full sanction of the Catholic Church. But the wheels of the church turned slowly, and the entity in the house was growing impatient. It knew it was being challenged. The activity in the house exploded. Objects flew across rooms with violent force. The stench of decay was now constant, and Bathsheba's attacks on Caroline intensified, leaving her bruised, battered, and on the verge of a mental breakdown. One fateful night, the Warrens decided they could wait no longer. Fearing that Caroline was losing her battle, that the entity was close to completely subsuming her, Ed decided to perform a lesson ritual, a séance intended to confront and hopefully expel the spirit. It was not a full exorcism, but it was a direct challenge, a challenge the entity accepted with glee. They gathered in the house, the Perron family huddled together, the Warrens and their small teens setting up their equipment. The air was electric, thick with a sense of impending doom. They chose not to use the cellar, the source of the power, fearing it would be too much to handle. It didn't matter. The entity could go wherever it pleased. As the séance began, Lorraine started to speak, calling out to the spirits in the house. The temperature dropped so fast, their breath plumed in the air. A low groan echoed from the walls, a sound of ancient pain and fury. And then it happened. Caroline, who had been sitting quietly, her face a mask of terror, suddenly stiffened. Her head snapped back, her body arching in a violent, unnatural spasm. When she looked up, her eyes were no longer her own. They were filled with ancient, bottomless hatred. A voice deep and resonant, a voice that was both male and female, erupted from her throat, a sound that clawed at the ears and chilled the soul. "She's mine," it roared, the sound seeming to come from the very foundations of the house. Caroline's body began to contort. She was thrown from her chair across the room as if by a giant invisible hand, slamming into the far wall. The team rushed to restrain her, but she fought with a strength that was utterly inhuman, throwing grown men aside. From the perspective of Andrea, the eldest daughter, it was the ultimate horror. This monster, this thrashing, screaming thing was wearing her mother's face. The voice that came from her mother's lips spoke in a language that wasn't English, a torrent of guttural clicks and snarls that felt ancient and evil. Then it shifted back to English, its words a venomous spray. It looked directly at the children. "I'll kill you all!" it shrieked in Caroline's voice, twisted into a demonic parody. "You're next." Lorraine was screaming, praying, trying to bind the entity, while Ed held a crucifix, reciting the rites of exorcism. But the entity was too strong. It was rooted in that land, in that house. It laughed at their prayers, a sound like grinding stone. Caroline's body levitated from the floor, her limbs twisted at impossible angles. Roger Perron watched, frozen in horror as the ritual tortured his wife. He saw the pain in her eyes beneath the hate. He saw the life being drained from her. In that moment, his fear was eclipsed by a fierce, protective rage. He made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. He lunged forward, shoving Ed Warren aside. "Get out!" he screamed, his voice raw with anguish. "Get out of my house! You're killing her! Leave us alone!" The Warrens were stunned. To them, stopping the ritual was unthinkable. It would leave the doorway open, leave Caroline vulnerable. But Roger was resolute. He saw the ritual not as a salvation, but as a violation that was destroying the woman he loved. He threw the Warrens and their entire team out of his home, into the cold Rhode Island night, and slammed the door behind them. The immediate aftermath was a deafening silence. Caroline's body collapsed to the floor, limp. The present, the suffocating evil seemed to recede, as if shocked by the sudden turn of events. For a moment, they thought it was over. They were wrong. The séance hadn't expelled the demon. It had enraged it, and by kicking out the Warrens, Roger had trapped his family inside with it, alone. The years that followed, from that night until they were finally able to sell the house and flee in 1980, were not a battle. The battle had been lost that night. What followed was a long, slow, agonizing occupation. The entity had won. It no longer needed to prove its power. It now toyed with them, its cruelty more refined, more psychological. It knew it owned them. They lived under its suffocating reign for 7 more years, the paranormal activity a constant, draining hum in the background of their lives. They learned to coexist with their monster, to step around the cold spots, to ignore the whispering in the walls, to brace for the inevitable terror at 5:15 a.m. They survived, but the scars ran deeper than any physical wound. The house had taken something from each of them that could never be reclaimed. They finally moved in 1980, financially ruined and emotionally shattered, leaving the darkness behind for the next unfortunate family. Andrea Perron would go on to write a series of books, House of Darkness, House of Light, documenting their ordeal in painstaking detail, a testament to what they endured. The story, as most people know it, ends there. The family escaped. The haunting was over. But here is the unexpected, the truly shocking truth that leaves the story unfinished, a wound that will not close. The entity that dwelled in the Harrisville farmhouse, the being that wore the mask of Bathsheba Sherman, was never truly interested in the land. The land was merely its anchor, its hunting ground. The curse Bathsheba laid was not on the property, but on those who would dare to create a family, to experience the maternal love she had twisted into hate. The entity wasn't attached to the house. All those years it had been forging a bond not with wood and stone, but with blood and trauma. It wasn't the house that was haunted. It was the Perron family. When they drove away from that farmhouse in 1980, they were not alone. A sliver of the darkness, a parasitic echo of the inhuman entity, clung to their bloodline. It didn't manifest in flying objects or foul odors anymore. It was quieter, more insidious. It manifested in nightmares that plagued them for decades, in unexplained misfortunes that followed them, in a lingering, unshakable feeling, even in a bright, sunny room, that they were being watched by something with a broken neck and hateful eyes. It was a generational trauma made terrifyingly literal. They had left the house, but the house had never, ever left them. The entity didn't want the house. It wanted a legacy. So, what do you think? Was it truly the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman, or was it something far older, something nameless, that simply wore her story as a convenient disguise? Did Roger Perron make a terrible mistake that night, or did he save his wife from a ritual that would have destroyed her, choosing a lifetime of being haunted over a moment of violent oblivion? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The deepest fears are the ones we discuss in the dark. Until next time, be careful what doors you open. You might not be able to close them again.